Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alain de Souche. I am part of the Pachamama Alliance, and we are part of a community here in Santa Cruz County and Santa Clara County. The work of the Pachamama Alliance is to create a work that works for everyone, an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just human presence on the planet. We organize in different communities. This community is what we call the South Bay community. We meet monthly. And before the pandemic, we had planned our monthly event in June to visit the Center for Farmworker Families in Watsonville. So with the pandemic, we have turned that into a virtual event. We are very pleased that you are here today. Thank you so much. We have the honor to have on this call the director and founder of the Center for Farmworker Families, Dr. Anne Lopez, and the director, the president of its board of director, Jason Bayless. So in a minute, I'm going to be introducing both Jason and Dr. Anne. I want to say something about the fact that given the current situation and awareness of the social injustice regarding Black lives, I want to say that the struggle of African American and Latinx people is the same struggle. It's a struggle to free yourself from oppression from our system who oppress people in the capitalistic model. There is no distinction between racism and capitalism. They're both joined, twins. So the struggle that we are fighting for with Black lives is the same struggle as we are fighting for farm workers. Half of them in California are undocumented and do not receive any benefit from the current gift of the federal government. So we are relying on our donations for the work of the farm workers. In a minute, we'll be hearing what this work is about. We'll also be hearing from Dr. Anne about the history of the farm workers, how come they end up being here instead of being in their farm in Mexico. So let's pause for a moment, take a deep breath, and appreciating all of you for being here and appreciating Dr. Anne and Jason for sharing this hour with us. We're going to be spending the next hour listening to them, and we'll be followed by half an hour where you'll have time to ask questions. My colleague Jody and Cecily will be monitoring this and facilitating it. Thank you so much for being here, and now I'm passing it to Jason and Dr. Anne.
Thank you, Alain. Thank you, South Bay Facilitators, for having us, and thank you for everybody who's watching on Facebook and YouTube. Also want to extend the acknowledgement to that this work that we're doing is to take on the systemic oppression that this country was founded on, that Black Lives Matter. And it's the same mentality that allows for the killing of Black men and women in this country, is the same mentality that allows us to create genocide with the indigenous communities, to take migrant workers and their families and split them up and put them in cages. It's the same mentality that allows us to create concentration camps, Japanese internment camps within the country. We are working towards making a world that works for all. We're working towards undoing and dismantling this oppression. And every reflection, every action that we do to that, to make that world better is important. These conversations are important. So I thank you, South Bay Facilitators, for allowing us to share with you through this hour of what farm workers in the United States and here in California experience, so we can get to know them even more. So thank you. And I would like to see if Ann would like to step up and have anything to say before we go into the details of this call. Ann?
Yes, I'm just delighted to be with all of you today. It's an honor to work with the Pachamama organization. I think their ideals are exactly what's needed in the world today. And I hope that we in our organization, Center for Farm Worker Families, can work with them to continue promoting these lofty ideals that really are realizable if enough people become educated and we keep moving ahead. I became involved with Center for Farm Worker Families many years ago when I worked on a PhD at UC Santa Cruz. And the subject of my dissertation research was to study the impact of the North American Free Trade Agreement on the farms in West Central Mexico. And I worked with families on 22 farms in Mexico, and then their family members who had immigrated to the United States. I interviewed about 38 farm worker families in Salinas and Watsonville. And what I found was a binational population in inordinate pain and suffering. And I realized that almost all the people that I talked to in this country were in pain because they wanted to be back on their farms. And this is a direct result of our trade policy, NAFTA. And I guess, what happened was I originally was planning to go into a university, teach, and continue the research. And when I finished my dissertation, I realized that if the public knew what I knew, this would not be tolerated. This kind of pain that's induced by our foreign policies simply would not be tolerated. It would need to be corrected. And so from that point on, we started working on an organizational structure in which we could move forward in educating the public and doing what we could to bring financial well-being and nutritional well-being to the farm worker populations. So that's basically where the Center for Farm Worker Families came from. Excuse me. And we became a 501c3 nonprofit in 2012, and we've been growing ever since. So there's more and more people that are becoming educated and learning about farm workers and feeling compelled to take a stand and a role in improving or correcting the conditions that they're faced with. Jason, are you next?
Yeah, I was trying to unmute. Thank you. So,
Jason, we can't see your face.
Oh, you can't see me.
No.
Let me see what I can do here. Let me do this. Hi.
There you are.
Thank you for that. I've been with Center for Farm Worker Families since 2015. Been working with Ann on various, pretty much everything, moving forward from websites to newsletters to helping with the farm worker reality tours, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. First part of this presentation is about our farm worker reality tour, because as Alon was saying, that we had them scheduled to come do a farm worker reality tour. So let me stop for a moment and just kind of give you what is a farm worker reality tour. the Center for Farmworker Families offers in-person tours that we call the Farmworker Reality Tour. And this gives people opportunity to come down to Watsonville and actually be in face-to-face conversation with farm workers, to hear their stories one-on-one, to see where they work, see how they work, to see where they live, and to be in dialogue with them. So, because we believe that once you have a relationship with something, it's hard to turn a blind eye to it or believe the stories that are fed to us by the oppressive system that we mentioned earlier. And what we've seen with Farmworker Reality Tours have been amazing. The deep connection that people get when they hear these stories from the farm workers about their struggles, because the news tells us that they're just coming across the border. But once you hear what that actually means and the struggles that the families have to go through to get here and why they're getting here, it really changes your heart and helps you become a better ally for farm workers. So on this presentation, the first part of it is we're going to try to replicate the Farmworker Reality Tour for you. Anne's going to talk about the history of Center for Farmworker Families, why the farm workers are here, why they're leaving their home country to come to the United States to work. And then we're going to play a video that a volunteer created that is actually translated by Anne, and you will hear the stories coming from their lips about their struggles the same way you would on a Farmworker Reality Tour. And then from there, we will talk about the other work that we do as Center for Farmworker Families, and then have a Q&A. And this is your opportunity where you can ask us questions, ask clarity. And the way you can participate is if you're watching on Facebook, you just leave a comment to the video that you're watching. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment on YouTube in the comment section, and we will pull from there. And if you're on the Zoom call with us, then you can just leave your comment if you don't want to be on screen in the chat room, and we will answer those questions. So again, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for allowing us to share our story and the stories of the farm workers. And with that, I would like to bring Anne back so she can tell us about the history and the Farmworker Reality Tour. Thanks.
So I'd like to just give you some background as to why so many undocumented farm workers are in the state at this point. The lowest figure I've seen is 60% of farm workers are undocumented. The high in Santa Cruz County is about 83%. We have an enormous Oaxacan farm worker population in the Watsonville area, and I have never met one that is documented. So that entire population is virtually undocumented. So why are they here? Well, it all goes again back to NAFTA, and I'd like to begin by describing what Mexico and the United States, what their relationship was prior to NAFTA. And prior to NAFTA, the Mexican government had a tariff system at the border, and they protected their small producer farmers. Now, the farms in Mexico prior to NAFTA were small producer farms or subsistence farms based on the sustainable corn, bean, and squash intercrop. We think these farming systems are at least 7,000 to 9,000 years old. And at the end of every season, the farmers would hand select the best corn, and they would save it to plant the following year. So what you have is genetic strains of corn perfectly adapted to whatever environment that family and that farm was located in. And Mexico has tremendous variation in its ecosystems. They've got deserts, they've got high mountains, they've got jungles, seashores, you name it, Mexico has it. And there were so many different diverse strains of corn that Mexico became known internationally as the repository for corn genetics for the world. And most of you probably know that there's 3 grains that support all of humanity: rice, wheat, and corn. So Mexico was it for corn. And anytime, anywhere, anybody, anywhere in the world had problems with their corn crop, they would come to Mexico, find a strain and an environment similar to where they came from, cross their corn with whatever the corn in Mexico was, and that usually solved the problem. So it was a completely sustainable system. And at the end of the harvest seasons, the Mexican government would buy up to 2/3 of the farmer's crop, and the rest of it the family would live on throughout the year. And then the government would set this all this corn they collected up in low-cost markets throughout the countryside, urban, rural, wherever. And anybody who couldn't afford food could go to one of these, what were called conasupos, and purchase corn at way below market price. And that way, Mexico mitigated poverty. The Mexico protected these small farmers with tariffs at the border. So the US, before NAFTA, became the #1 corn producer in the world. And the first thing they wanted to do was get their corn into Mexico. But Mexico had these tariffs at the border. So in other words, if you were an Iowa farmer and you had a truckload of corn you wanted to sell in Mexico, you could fill up your truck, go to the border, and somebody would be there and weigh your truck and charge you enough money so that you'd realize there was no profit in taking it into Mexico, and you would keep it in the United States. So the whole idea behind NAFTA, free trade, was to free all of the US farmers from the tariffs at the border so that they could send their corn into Mexico. The board of NAFTA, which was very secretive, I remember researching who were the people on that board, and it's almost impossible to find. And they viewed the way that Mexicans grew corn as, quote, inefficient in the neoliberal economy. And I always say that there's 4 pillars to the neoliberal economy: deregulate, privatize, get rid of public services, and if somebody can't make it in the economy, you blame them. So you blame the poor. And so the idea was that Mexico was not growing corn efficiently. What we need to do is run all those farmers off their land and have them go to the border and become employed in the maquiladoras, or the companies at the border that made various forms of widgets or whatever, and use their labor for profit. That was the idea. So when NAFTA was drafted and Clinton signed NAFTA in 92, I believe it was, and it went into effect in 94, the agreement was that the tariffs would be gradually taken down over a 15-year period. And this way, all of these rural farmers would have a chance and time to adjust to the NAFTA economy and find alternative employment. I was down in Mexico interviewing farmers at this time, and in fact, all the tariffs were gone within 30 months. There was massive chaos. People could not understand why their corn wasn't worth as much to the government outposts anymore. Why a gallon of gas was now twice the price it was before. And almost immediately, literally tons of genetically modified US corn, hybrid corn, started being dumped into Mexico. And this corn was so cheap, it undercut the price that these rural farmers in Mexico had always gotten to survive with. So even though they lived mostly in rural areas on their own corn, bean, and squash intercrop, they still needed money for farming implements, for doctors, for clothing, etc. And so now all of that was wiped out. The conasupos that the government posts that supplied below price grains to the poor, those were all wiped out. So suddenly you have US corn flowing into Mexico. You've got all these farmers realizing that they cannot survive and support their family anymore. So what are they going to do? Well, they had three choices. One was to stay on their farm, not leave, and starve with their family members. And I actually interviewed two families on two farms who made that choice. They said, we've been here for generations, we love this land, and we're not leaving. So that's one choice. Another choice is to send an older son or a father to a large city like Guadalajara or Mexico City and have them look for work and send money home to the family on the farm. If you go up in a plane these days above Mexico City, there are so many shanty towns of these displaced farmers ringing Mexico City that you actually can't see where the city ends and where the open lands begin. It's just a mass of shanty towns, the city and shanty towns. So that's the second option. A third option is to make an undocumented border crossing to the US and try to find work on farms here. And so the current farm worker population that we have in this country, especially in California, is primarily made up of what I call economic refugees of NAFTA. They have been run off their land and they're in the country in order to survive. So what you hear on the news about how they're breaking our immigration laws, no, we violated their human rights by depriving them of their employment and running them off their farms into our country as their only means, or one of their only means of survival. So that's basically where the farm worker population came from. Now, this is a real boon for the growers in the state, because if you study the history of farm work in California especially, we've gone through one ethnic group after the other, including Chinese, Japanese, Hindu people, all different groups. And then once they start demanding rights, then they have to leave and another group comes in. So now what we have is this docile group of undocumented farm workers who are afraid to unionize. And partly that is because they don't want to be deported. They've brought their families here or started families here. They don't want to be deported and have their families torn apart. And the growers threaten to blacklist them through the state so they can't get employment. So they're basically caught in this web of oppression from which escape is nearly impossible. But the source, and it's so interesting because this has been an enormous humanitarian disaster that almost never was mentioned in the newspapers. I was just amazed writing this up and thinking, where is it in the newspaper? Salinas de Gortari, then president of Mexico, estimated that 1 million farmers would leave the land in Mexico every year for the first 15 years of NAFTA. That's 15 million farmers leaving the land. Where did they expect these people to go? And so most of them are here. I just think it's a crime. It's a crime against humanity that almost no one knows about. But the profits coming out of this, of course, are huge. So that is the source of today's farm workers. Now, I don't know if I have time to talk about their conditions now. Jason, is this
Yes.
a good time?
This is a good time.
Okay. So once they get here, they live in, as I mentioned before, Rick Mines at UC Davis says they would have been better off to stay in Mexico because the longer they're here, the sicker they get. They die at an average life expectancy of 49 years. And when they die, you never see it in the obituaries. You never see it publicized. Sometimes their bodies are sent back to Mexico for burial with their family on farms. And then new people come in. So it's like use and discard labor. It's a use and discard labor force. They live in extreme poverty. They make between $17,000 and $20,000 a year typically, which is way below the federal poverty level. They can't afford good food. They have high incidence of sugar addiction, diabetes, high cholesterol. In order to afford rents, several families generally join together and rent a small place. I mean, I know of one where there are 16 people living in less than 1,000 square feet, and they have one bathroom. They tell me that they have to line up in the morning to go to the bathroom. They're overworked, they're exposed to pesticides, toxic pesticides, and they eventually just die. And it's, oftentimes of various kinds of cancers or diabetes related illnesses or heart disease. So these are the conditions. Now, the COVID situation that has happened in the last several weeks has put farm workers in even a worse situation. The work itself is very sporadic. It's been a very erratic season, so there's no consistent work for hardly anybody. And so they don't have money to buy food or to pay rent. They're always afraid of deportation, which makes me very angry because no one who works months and years in the field should be worried about deportation. We're lucky to have them here doing that work, is the way I look at it. And finally, there's panic in the community now over the COVID issue. And yet, because they live in such crowded conditions, they can't socially isolate several families in one unit. So that's the condition of farm workers now. And later, I guess I can talk about some of the good things that we're doing, right, Jason?
Yeah, we can. Let's go to the video of the farm workers, and then we'll circle back around.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to play a quick video, and this is kind of the experience that you would have on a farm worker reality tour. And what you're going to witness in this video, this was done by a volunteer who filmed at one of the farm worker reality tours. And on the tour, you get a chance to sit down and hear their story of from coming from Mexico to here, to finding work, to the struggles that they have, to how they connect with their family. And yeah, so we'll play that video now.
Is the recording on, Jason?
Yes.
Okay.
So we got employed with a farmer who grew some sort of herbs that are used in Asian food. I don't know exactly what they are, but it required that you cut them and pack them in a box. And they had no child care, so she would put her daughter in a box in the sun next to her in the row, and while she cut these plants and packed them, her daughter, she would drag the box along with her, and the daughter would get hungry, but she didn't have time to feed her. So the daughter would start grabbing plants and dirt and stuff and trying to put it in her mouth to alleviate her hunger. And about this time, I found out I was pregnant with my second daughter, whose name is Flor. So Maria, the oldest, who's now 15, as a baby, from eating the dirt and the plants, she got really bad diarrhea and vomiting. And they took her to a doctor who told them that it was because of these things that she had gotten sick, and gave her medicine, and the medicine got her well. So the whole purpose of working for the grower in Culiacan was to eventually amass enough money to pay a coyote, a human smuggler, to get the family across the border into the United States. And so once Maria was well, and I was still, and I'd had Flor, she'd had Flor, they headed out to Altar, Sonora, which is just on the other side of the border in Mexico, and they sought out a coyote that would help them get across the border, the whole family. And so they finally found one, and he said that he would be happy to help them across, but each of them would have to carry one baby on their back in a shawl, and then carry their food and water in their hands as they walked through the desert. So the coyote told us the first night that we would have to walk completely in darkness through the desert. We couldn't have any light at all, because that would alert the migra or the INS to where we were located, and we could be caught. So we had to walk through the desert in complete darkness. So walking through the desert at night was terrible. I would trip over rocks. I'd walk underneath trees without knowing it, and it would grab my hair and grab the baby on my back. I got spines in my legs and blisters all over my legs. And I just was walking like a blind person through the desert. And she told me another time she was worried about snakes and scorpions and all those things which you wouldn't be able to see if you were walking at night. And so by the third night, she felt like she couldn't go on. And she asked the coyote to just call the migra and have him come and capture her and send her back. But he showed her a light out in the distance and said that the light is where the United States is. So just try to be strong enough to get to that light, and you'll be there, and encouraged her to keep going. And so they kept going for 2 more nights, and they got to the United States. So by the 5th night, we finally got to a place, a reservation of Native Americans on the other side of the border, and they fed us and gave us water for baths and helped us with the babies. Our 2 babies hadn't eaten anything the whole 5 days, so they were just skin and bones, and we were able to rest for a night before heading to Watsonville the next day. So the next day, a van pulled up to pick us all up. There were 14 of us. There were no seats in the van, and they just basically pushed us in the van like cattle, piled us up, and told us that they were going to drive straight to Watsonville from Arizona, and they wouldn't be stopping for bathroom break, just have to put up with it. So by the time they got to Watsonville, they were able to stay with a family that they knew from Oaxaca. And the next day after they arrived, they went out and started looking for work. And everywhere they went, the grower would ask them if they knew how to pick strawberries. And they'd tell them that they didn't know how to pick strawberries. And so they went farm to farm and got that same response for 2 to 3 weeks until they finally found a grower who said that he would teach them how to pick strawberries as long as they stayed with him for a period of time. So we worked for the grower that taught us how to pick strawberries for 6 years, and then my back just started killing me from being bent over picking strawberries. So then we decided to go pick apples instead. But the apples were a problem because we'd have to wear a sack over our chest on the side and fill it up with 20 to 25 pounds of apples. And that put a lot of pressure on my chest muscles and my neck. And so to this day, she's injured in both her back and also her chest muscles and her neck. And so she's really in nearly constant pain. And I remember her calling me one time, and her whole family was crying in the background, and she was telling me she was going to die. She was in so much pain. She kept going to the emergency room with her pain, but they wouldn't do much. And so finally we went and spent a day at Natividad Hospital, and we spent the day there, and finally at the end of the day they gave us charity care. And so she could have an endoscopy for a lower price or no cost. And then the day of the procedure, they called me and said she needed to bring a $750 check. And I said, can she make payments? No, it has to be in one check. And I said, well, no farm worker has a $750 check, I'm sorry. Well, then she can't have the procedure. So I did a crowdfunding of some kind and called a bunch of friends, and we got the money together. And she eventually had the endoscopy, and she had 2 ulcers. And if those ulcers had started bleeding, she could have died. And this is one way farm workers die, is that, you know, they just kind of disappear and they're never in the obituary columns. And their bodies may be sent back to Mexico, that's the end of them, and new ones come in. And we went from clinic to clinic, and all they do is take her money or my money and not do anything. So finally, in exasperation, I told her, I said, we're going to go to my doctor in Santa Cruz. And we went, and there was a man, a PA, a physician's assistant from Oaxaca, and he just sat her on a table and said, here, drink this. And it was this really thick-looking, awful stuff, and she drank it and got relief immediately. And then my doctor started treating her with over-the-counter omeprazole, I guess it was called. And since then, she's been okay. But it was really a rough experience. And I think this speaks to what happens with farm workers because they don't have any health insurance. What do you do in those kind of cases if you don't know the right person? You'll get a sense of what people go through to get here. I mean, no one leaves their home villages and their families behind unless they're desperate. And I think that's the first thing we have to remember when we start condemning people for coming here and talking about infestations and Mexicans being murderers and rapists.
People talk about farm workers coming here to try to get a better life and all of that. No, most of them are here under duress. The lady where we're going to eat dinner, she has not seen her mother in 20 years. She can't go back to Mexico, and her mother is 90 years old. I can't tell you the number of farm workers who I've talked to who start crying and telling me that so-and-so in their family is dying in Mexico and they can't go be with them. I mean, this is really inhumane, and we must reform this system. It's absolutely inhumane and unacceptable.
to just take a moment to hold on to their words. Okay, thank you. Anne?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about now what we do to try to correct some of these situations. I discovered early on that in the winter time in the Oaxacan community, people starve. And I did this by visiting the woman who just gave her talk in the video. I visited her family, and she had two little, this was in February after a long rainy season. And I visited her, and we were having conversation, and her two little girls were crying for food. And she wasn't reacting, she wasn't doing anything to get them food. So finally I stopped the conversation. I said, give them something to eat. And she looked down at the floor like she was totally ashamed. And I, on instinct, went over and opened her refrigerator. And what she had was 1 head of lettuce, 1/3 gallon of milk, and 2 Jello cups. And I said, well, where is your food? We don't have any food because we're not working. We just have to put up and try to withstand this hunger until we can work again. And I told her, I said, we don't do that here. And I said, is this true of the whole community? Yes, we're all hungry because no one has money to buy food. So I called the Community Action Board. They called Second Harvest Food Bank, and Second Harvest Food Bank brought out food for 144 families that very afternoon. So, yay. So since then, we started partnering with the Second Harvest Food Bank, and now once a month we have what we call distributions of food, household goods, clothing, and whatever else people want to bring to contribute to farm workers. We had one this past Friday, and we had a group called Viva la Mujer that puts together nice little bags full of products for farm worker women. We had a Vegan Now group come, and they provided a hot meal of Mexican food for everybody that went through the line. And we usually get about 160 families that show up. We have piles of clothes and other donations. So it's kind of like a replenishing fair of sorts. We had census workers taking census. There's all kinds of things that go on. We have researchers from UC Merced and UC Davis come and do nutrition studies so that they can write up reports on farm worker nutrition. So we do this once a month. And then as far as rent goes, because the work is so erratic this year, we have been discussing with the Community Foundation of Santa Cruz County the plight of farm workers not being able to pay rent, and they gave us about $90,000 so we could write $1,000 rent assistance checks to all of the most needy undocumented farm workers, which I thought was really quite amazing. We the Rose Foundation gave us money for buying whatever we needed, food or rental assistance. The 1440 Foundation has given us literally pounds and pounds of rice and black beans, which is the preferred kind of beans that the Oaxacan community likes, to distribute in bags to farm workers so no one has to be hungry. We have the Tanzanian Education Fund this last month brought out 350 brand new pairs of shoes that in all different sizes for all different ages that farm worker families could come and choose from. And then there's an anonymous couple in Santa Cruz that was very concerned about the plight of farm workers during the COVID crisis and gave us a whole lot of money so we could even offer more rental checks to farm workers. We have two sheds, one in the northern part of Watsonville and one in the southern part. We keep those stocked with basic goods and food and clothing, so any farm worker can come to either shed and take what they need. We have the organization called Jelly Beans, and they have a sort of subsidiary organization called Hope's Closet. And anybody that needs clothes for their children or car seats or anything related to children can call them in either language, tell them what they need, and they'll put together a bag of clothes and toys and whatever is needed for that particular child. We have worked on legislation, and we have several things happening here. We got AB 1066 passed about 4 years ago, Lorena Gonzalez's bill, and this gives farm workers overtime pay if they work more than an 8-hour day, which is most of them work as many as 13 hours. So this is really a plus. We worked on Robert Rivas's AB 1783 to build family-friendly farm worker housing on surplus agricultural land, and that's now going into effect, and the housing is being constructed. And most recently, Robert Rivas has a bill in appropriations in the Assembly called AB 1740, and that would standardize OSHA standards for all of the farms in California, so that farm workers are protected from the COVID virus, and they can have appropriate spacing and masks and whatever they need to protect themselves. So we are working on legislation. We've had issues with the migrant camp. We have 24 migrant camps in the state of California. There used to be a regulation called the 50-mile regulation. And this regulation required families living there at the end of the season to move at least 50 miles away if they want to come back to the camp the following season. Well, what this does is disrupts their children's education, and nobody graduates from high school, which then leaves the children with about two choices. To either become farm workers, which is convenient, or else join gangs. And we were angry about this, and I kept asking, what is the purpose of the 50-mile regulation? I went to Sacramento on 7 occasions, and no one could give me an answer to that. And so we fought for throwing that rule out so farm workers wouldn't have to move 50 miles away, and their children could have stable education all year round in one school. And as it turned out, I just on a fluke happened to go to a presentation by our current Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kounalakis. And she asked me what I do, and I told her, and she said, well, gee, I'd like to meet some migrants. So I took her to the local migrant camp, and I took her to the most vocal, angry farm worker about the 50-mile regulation. And the farm worker gave her the whole story, and she was so upset, she called the attorney general right from their place. And she sent me an email about 2 or 3 weeks later and said she sent a message to, or an email to Governor Brown at the time, telling him this had to go. And sure enough, he signed a trailer on a bill, and out the door went the 50-mile regulation. So now they don't have to move 50 miles away, thank goodness. Now what we have is children becoming educated on the internet through their schools, and somehow the internet has disappeared from the migrant camp. So that's what we're pursuing now. And ultimately what we'd like to do is to work to have half the units in the camp set aside for permanent year-round residents, because what I've seen is the same families returning year after year for 23 years. So you can imagine what it would be like to move out of your place and then move back into your place and out and in over and over again over many years. I mean, this is ridiculous. So those are the things we're working on now. And I've learned that rather than going through the channels, the appropriate channels to get these things handled, it's better to go around the system, so you're not beating your head against the wall, and talk to people who are influential and are sympathetic and can make a difference. So those are some of the things that we've done and we have accomplished. In addition, it's been very inspiring to me to see the community step up to the plate during this COVID crisis and do so much for farm workers, unlike anything I've seen. There's people making masks for farm workers. We've gotten hundreds of masks. So there's people collecting basic goods that they need, like diapers and shampoo and soap and toilet paper, the things that they need. There are caravans now going through the fields with big signs thanking farm workers for their work and offering them items that all farm workers eventually need. There was even a caravan of doctors and nurses recently that went through the fields in this way. I mentioned the community foundation stepping up to the plate with funds for rental assistance. We've had the food bank. They tell me if anybody's hungry, we'll bring food out. So Santa Cruz County has been really responsive to the issues of farm workers. And I'm beginning to think that for the first time, the value that farm workers are as essential workers is starting to be recognized even nationwide. We are getting donations from all over the country, not just California, but from Pennsylvania, from Florida, from New Jersey, from the Midwest. I mean, it's quite remarkable. There's definitely a sea change happening, which is so needed, and I'm delighted to see. So I think that's a pretty good, we do binational work in Mexico as well. We go to the high mountains of Jalisco and we throw piñata parties in the poorest villages, find out what people need, and we have supplied jackets to everybody in some villages. Shoes are always needed. And the last trip I came back from in March, we provided a pair of shoes for all the children in a village that just had, if you could call them shoes, they had no soles on them any longer. We also work in Oaxaca, and we supply clothing and food for the remotest indigenous villages there as well. So I think that pretty much is a brief summary of what we've accomplished.
One thing I would like to add, just to highlight all this wonderful work that the Center for Farmworker Family does, that Dr. Ann Lopez spearheads, is that everyone who works at the Center for Farmworker Families are volunteers. So when we get
Yes.
donations, none of the money goes to paying somebody's salary or anything. The kind of, when money comes in, the bills that we do pay is for our office, so we can have a centralized location so farm workers can come to and feel safe to come to get resources. We pay for the internet, we pay for the PO box and stuff like that, just to keep, you know, the physical doors open. But none of us take money for salary or anything like that to do this work. It's all volunteer, and everybody who's on the board is also a volunteer. So I think that's just really important to me, because I know when we were looking at what people are doing, how we're standing with farm workers, how we're working together, the volunteer piece is really important to me, because when we're in these conversations, the number one question that people ask is, what can I do? You know, what can I do to help farm workers? And there's not much in terms of like what we physically individually can do, other than say buy organic, because at least the farm workers don't get sprayed with pesticide as much.
Right.
But if we really look at that, we're all volunteers and we're all in this together to create that world that we were speaking to before, to create that world that we all want and deserve. Then, you know, the caravans happen, the food banks happen, you know, when we're in the conversation is like, how can we show up to support each other and build that community? All the things that you heard and speak about came from us being in conversation with others and people wanting to do something and stepping into that and volunteering and building that community. So I think that's one of the strongest foundations, one of the reasons I love working with Center for Farmworker Families is that foundation. It's like we're coming from this to build that better world. We're not just doing it because we're NGO and, you know, we're trying to get paid or whatever.
Yeah.
We actually see this as a systemic issue that we're trying to resolve. So I just wanted to...
I'd like to step in just for a minute and say that there are three things I've found that farm workers need more than anything. One, comprehensive immigration reform. As I mentioned before, no one who's worked months and years in the field should be worried about deportation. I just think this is unethical. Number two, they need a living wage. They need to get out of poverty. These people are too hardworking and their work is too essential to leave them in the conditions that I've witnessed. And finally, they need a contract with their grower so that the grower doesn't steal their wages, which is rampant. I hate to say it, but here they already are impoverished, and then whoever hires them can steal their money because they won't give them a contract. So these are three big things. Now, in order to handle number one, which is comprehensive immigration reform, I think we need a new federal government. We're not going to get it out of the current government. So we need a more enlightened leader who is open to reforming these immigration laws that are way, way passé. The last time we had any kind of immigration reform, I think, was 1983 with the Immigration Reform and Control Act, but we haven't had really anything since. So that leaves us to vote. We need to vote in new leadership. So if you know of people that are thinking of not voting, please encourage them to vote. If they can vote, get them to the polls to vote. We need new blood at the administrative level. And then I think that we need to promote a state conversion to organic agriculture. We don't need pesticides. There have been at least 3 excellent studies, including one by the UN and a 30-year study by the Rodale Institute, that show that if we converted to organic overnight, we could feed everybody on the planet. So why are we poisoning ourselves, the planet, and farm workers? Makes no sense other than for profits for the agrochemical industries. There is a new report that is really excellent. I had it on my desk somewhere, but anyway, it's called, it's put out by California Farmer, what is it? California CCOF, California Certified Organic Farmers, and it's a roadmap to organic conversion of the state of California. And I think we really need to move in that direction. And then ultimately, I would like to see farm worker co-ops rather than having this hierarchical system where you have a millionaire grower and all of these subjugated farm workers. I think it would be great to have our food picked by cooperatives of farm workers who were able to share in the profits. So I think I'll just be quiet now and let somebody else talk.
I have a question. Are you still holding the secret markets? I don't know what you call them.
Yeah, the distributions, the hidden
Yeah,
food banks. Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah, we do. We had a perfect location in Watsonville, and then a reporter came for the Christian Science Monitor and did a beautiful study and took pictures of everything. And so now, you know, we've had to find new locations that we rotate among because undocumented farm workers rarely leave wherever they're living.
They won't come.
Yeah, and they won't come unless they feel safe. So, you know, we have to get out the word that this is safe, and we just hope that ICE doesn't show up. I think that there's such antipathy toward ICE in the area that they'd be hard pressed to show up anytime soon, at least, but one never knows. It's just, again, living, you know, can you imagine? It's like living hunted.
No, I can't.
Yeah, it's like feeling like you're being hunted. And, you know, I was telling somebody the other day, these people feed me. They're out in the field working hard so I can eat, and I have to hide to give them food. What is wrong with this picture?
Well, you must have already developed relationships with your legislators.
Yes.
I mean, it seems like government is kind of the way to go to deal with the things that you listed as being important and relevant.
Right.
But it seems that, so the first thing that, I mean, it seems that went into my mind was, well, you know, there needs to be a conversation and with the legislators, and then I thought, well, you must be in touch. I mean, you must have connections there.
Well, we do, especially locally. I mean, Mark Stone and Robert Rivas are right there with us. But unfortunately, in fact, I remember naively asking Mark Stone, can't we have our own state immigration policy? Forget this federal nonsense. And he says, no, it has to happen at the federal level. So we don't have any control over immigration, really. And if you look at who's in the White House and the thinking, they're not gonna want to document undocumented workers. Unfortunately, there's too much money going to growers and industries.
Before we jump into the quote, let me set it up because there's other people real quick. We are going to the Q&A, so I just want to let people who are on YouTube and our Facebook, if you want to give a question, please just add your question to the chat and we will say it on your behalf. And for those who don't want to be on camera, who are on the Zoom, if you put it in the chat, we'll also grab your questions. And for those who do, you can just move forward. So go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that probably the focus needs to be on the election right now.
Yes.
Because that's the most eminent thing and it's the most critical. a lot of
Yep.
reasons why we want to work on the election.
Yes, exactly.
Get people out to vote.
Exactly.
So there is a question from Susie saying, the clothing donations, what ages would we say we need the most?
What age? I'm sorry, what ages?
Yeah, for the clothing donations?
Oh, clothing, for clothing, children's clothing. Children's clothing, because they grow out of them so fast. So there's always a need for children's clothing and size 5 diapers. That's the most requested household item.
Thanks.
Anne,
Yes.
could you in the chat list the pieces of legislation that you're working on that we might be able to talk to our politicians about in terms of supporting that through the legislative body?
Well, other than the immigration issue, which is huge, we've gotten AB 1066 with the overtime. That one's done. We've got that overtime pay, and 1783 passed. I spoke there. We are working on AB 1740, and that's in the Appropriations Committee in the Assembly at this point. So that one's the one to establish universal OSHA standards in the fields for all farm workers.
And this is Tatanka. I think one of the quickest ways to get at the pesticide issue will be to integrate this into what Romero is writing as the California Green New Deal. They have one of the 13 areas is agriculture. They may already have it, but they have a 50-page draft that if you don't have, I can get to you. And I know Danny and Sarah would love to integrate whatever thoughts you have in that, because that will be regenerative. They have many ideas on that, like every city within 90 days is going to have to provide a plan to use all unused city and county land for regenerating the soil to draw down carbon and organic and all that. So it's very comprehensive for the whole state on all these areas. And the intent is to really get that passed by 2022, but to set it all up by working on the election to get the most progressive people elected in California. Yes. And both the Dolores Huerta Foundation and Romero now are working together on that. And Danny and Sarah, for all the Pachamama people that don't know, I brought Danny up to meet with Bill and Mario at Pachamama, and Pachamama is intending, Mario says, to have the California Green New Deal as one of the official Pachamama projects that every local group should work on. So
wonderful.
Yeah, we need to integrate and all work together on this to create a coalition that is just overwhelming in California, because we can get it done in California, whereas nationally we have no idea.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And we work with Californians for Pesticide Reform. In fact, we share an office with them in downtown Watsonville, and we have had some successes. I don't know if you know about the insecticide chlorpyrifos.
Yes.
This insecticide, if a woman is pregnant in the field, her fetus, if she's exposed, oftentimes, I think more often than not, comes out with autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, etc. I mean, it's just cruel. And then these kids, and they lose IQ, and then they go to surrounding schools, and chlorpyrifos and other organophosphates actually vaporize and move through the fields into the classroom and affect the children's learning and brains. And so we have gotten, chlorpyrifos is no longer allowed to be sold in the state of California. And by the end of the year, there is no chlorpyrifos in California. So we also have gotten rid of Roundup, glyphosate, which causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, from the Pajaro Union School District. So we went to the board meeting and got unanimous approval to no longer use that. So I think,
And
yeah, we're moving right along. But this, you know, we could all join in with the Green New Deal for California.
Yeah, because it has ways of preventing corporate capture, because when Roundup goes out, you know they're developing something else.
Yes.
So we really have to change the system, and this is our time. This is our time to do it. We can do it.
That's right. I agree. I'm with you.
Whatever help you need in making connections with either, you know, Dolores Huerta Foundation, which you may already have, or with Romero, to just make sure your work, the intelligence and the commitment of your work is integrated with that, I'll assist you.
Well, just sign us up for that Green New Deal. I think that's, okay. We're there. We're with you.
And there's just to speak to it also, there's many fronts on the Green New Deal is definitely important. And there's also a movement kind of taking the page out of the housing rent movement that happened in California. North Bay Organizing Project is working on banning pesticides within specific counties such as Sonoma County, and they're inspiring other counties to do the same. So there's grassroots work doing to help raise awareness around this too, that will also help give leverage to the Green New Deal too. So
yeah, in order to pass it, it's both a series of bills that is one comprehensive, but they have to be introduced separately. And we need to build a grassroots movement with all those organizations you're talking about to get it passed.
Absolutely.
You're right.
I think it's entirely possible.
Yes, it is.
There's a couple of questions coming in. I want to make sure we have enough time to grab those. One question is, what are the ethical local farms that we would recommend or suggest to the viewers here?
You mean the socially just ones?
Yeah.
There's only two that I know of in the state of California. That is Jim Cochran's Swanton Berry Farm. All of the farm workers on his farm have UFW contracts. So that if you have a chance to buy Swanton berries, they're delicious, and you're supporting farm workers in the process. Also Pie Ranch, that's the other one. But there really has been no incentive, unfortunately, to, you know, like I said, organic, non-GMO in the stores, but socially just is just not on the radar for most people. I think it's because they don't know.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I want to say thank you to Becca on Facebook for donating to Center for Farm Worker Families through the Facebook app. Thank you so much. The next question that we have is, can you talk more about the living conditions that are the camps subsidized? Are they acceptable in terms of comfort? And do farm workers need to pay rent?
Oh, yes. Farm workers pay rent just like everybody else. Now, the migrant camps are the only place, oh, excuse my voice. The migrant camps are the only place I've seen where there is, that are clean, decent, comfortable places to live. And the problem with them is that they have to move out every year and then come back every year. So this moving back and forth is really a pain. They do pay rent, but it's really, really low. So they are state subsidized camps. Those are the best living situations I've seen. Other than that, what people do is live in dilapidated houses or unkept apartment houses in the Watsonville area, scattered throughout the city. And the owners of these places rarely take care of their property. In fact, right now we're dealing with finding a refrigerator, since the refrigerator in the unit broke down, for a farm worker family that has children and their refrigerator broke, and the owner of the apartment refuses to replace it. We bought a stove for another farm worker who wouldn't have had a stove. So most of these people do nothing to take care of their property and just collect the rent. And I don't know why they do that with the price of real estate, what it is today, but that's what I've experienced. I guess they feel they can get away with it with farm workers. So why make the effort? Very frustrating. And luckily we have a religious group that moved into Watsonville from Kansas, and they know how to fix a lot of things that go wrong in houses. And I've had them, they've offered to replace rugs that are falling apart and filthy with flooring. We bought the flooring and they put it in, holes in the wall, broken windows. It's really a travesty. It's very sad.
We have another question here from Alon asking, how is the census impacting farm workers? How are they able to fill it up without internet and the fear of the government agents?
Well, we had 2 or 3 census workers come to the last distribution with their computers, and they had various kinds. I think they had certificates to give any farm worker who participated in the census. And at the end, they told me they got lots of farm workers and lots of good data. So we'll just have them back for every distribution.
Right.
You want to say something, Holly?
Anything else?
Any questions from YouTube?
There. I had to find my mute button. I just wanted to know if there's any groups on the San Jose side of the hill that provide, the kind of support or what that you offer through this Center for Farm Worker Families.
Yes. In fact, the Santa Teresa Catholic Church has consistently brought over gifts and toys and music and piñatas and everything at Christmas time for farm workers. And we have a big farm worker Christmas, and all the kids get toys at Christmas. They've done the same thing with eggs. They brought at Easter, they bring over 1,500 eggs, set up an Easter egg hunt, and they bring packages of groceries and just an abundance of things for people. And it becomes a real celebration. Notre Dame High School also contributes. St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church also contributes. So mostly the religious communities are the ones that really step up to the plate. But then there's individuals in San Jose that send donations as well. But as far as organizations, most of them are religious organizations.
Okay. There was a
Is the St. Francis
Thank you.
the one in East Palo Alto?
I'm sorry, what?
Is the St. Francis of Assisi one from the peninsula? Is that the one in East Palo Alto or from a different area?
I thought it was from San Jose.
Oh, San Jose. They do have one.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Anna, I had a question. You mentioned a little bit the need for cooperatives, and I was wondering if there any grower farm that has a model set up where the farm worker are part owners.
I haven't seen that, but what I have seen is some farm workers go to ALBA, what is it called? Associated Land-Based Agriculture. And at ALBA, they set up classes to teach farm workers how to farm organically. They actually, after the coursework, give them some land to farm. They teach them the bookkeeping. They teach them every aspect. And there have been some farm workers who've become farmers and done quite well using the ALBA program. So that's one benefit. But as far as a farm that has part ownership or cooperative associations of farm workers, I think that's in the future somewhere.
How do people become eligible to participate in this ALBA program?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Who gets to participate in this
ALBA program?
ALBA program, yeah. How do people?
Any farm worker. And they even set up the classes so that the classes are given at times when farm workers aren't working, so they don't have to quit their job to take the courses. I've been down to their setup, and it's beautiful. It's in Salinas, and it's just beautiful the way they have it set up. And they teach them everything, all aspects of farming. So they can't, they really can't miss if they go through this program.
It's free.
Yeah, I think, yes, either that or they have scholarships, because farm workers can't afford a program, right?
And Anne, you said that they even give them some land to farm. I mean, is that for permanent or?
No, that's just initially so that they can practice and then have a chance to sell their produce and learn how to do that and keep records and that kind of thing.
But in order to have a farm, they'd have to be able to buy land, right?
Well, either that or rent it, possibly. But I think that ALBA helps them make those kind of connections as well.
Mm-hmm. And that might be the basis for a cooperative if a group of people got together to buy land, correct?
Yes, that would be wonderful. Yeah, I would love to see that.
And for the closest way to get to co-ops, to let you know, on the housing component of the Green New Deal, there are going to be regional state banks set up with a focus on low cost and cooperative money going directly to people, both in rural areas and in urban areas.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Excellent. Sounds like a much more humane system.
Oh.
Do we have any other questions? There's none coming in on the social media. Anybody here?
I don't have a question, Anne, but I must tell you, I'm absolutely blown away by all that you've done. I mean, it's astounding what you are doing, what you have done, how far you've come. I mean, I know it all comes from your heart. It's like you just see people in need and you figure out a way to do something about it. And it's just, I mean, it's truly extraordinary.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's just, I always tell people, if given the knowledge I have about what's going on, I have a choice of doing something about it or getting ulcers. And I think the healthier alternative is to do something about it. And it's pure passion, really. I mean, it's pure passion.
I mean, I imagine you are approaching sainthood in the eyes of your constituents.
No, the farm workers call me an angel.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do. You truly are.
Well, somebody's got to do something about this. This is disgraceful.
It is disgraceful.
I can't live 14 miles away from these people knowing about the suffering and just sit back and have a glass of wine. I mean, it's just something has to be done. I hope you all will join me in this quest. We must reform this system.
Right. Well, I mean, I just donated some money to you, but is there anything that I mean, and I think you need clothing, you need food, you need, the basic things for them. Is there anything that we can do from here other than that?
Well, if you're interested in meeting farm workers, you could come to one of our distributions and help us pass things out. And then you'd have direct contact, unlike what we're doing here on a farm worker reality tour.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah. But yeah.
So that's a possibility. And you can call me about a week ahead. We always have them the second Friday of the month. So you can call me about a week ahead and I'll give you the address. I don't put it on any social media or internet or anything.
Right. Do you ever have a thing where someone can adopt a family?
Yeah, we have 2 families adopted. We have one, in fact, one woman who she has two young boys, both of whom have ADHD from working in the fields, and 2 older kids. And she came to City Hall to give a talk to a bunch of people one time and just broke down and sobbing about her situation. I call her my hero that she's even alive. And a family stepped up to the plate, and now they send her a check they send it to me, and then I text her and tell her her check has come and send it and take it to her. And then we just had another family who has a daughter in college, and I forgot 3 or 4 other children adopted as well. So yes, that is very beneficial and helpful.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. Well, maybe you and I can talk privately sometime. Yes.
Sure. That sounds great. Thank you.
So I really want to bring forward this incredible gratitude for Dr. Ann Lopez and Jason for bringing us so much information. And you are an angel, so we may even have to adopt an angel as well. And I hope that you will put your, again, your email, Ann, for people to connect with you about this particular distribution if they want to be a part of that, or because I don't know that we have that in our chat room at this moment. And to really, continue to ask for donations, to ask particularly for things. I think we're going to have that in the chat room where we can actually gift money to the Center for Farm Workers Families. And I think that this is a time to just wrap this up and just be in total gratitude for your time and the extraordinary talent in terms of what you're pursuing and what you're planning to change. And we're with you. That's the good news. So,
well, that's what's so wonderful about you people. It's such a delight to speak with a group that is so open to supporting this kind of thing. So thank you. It's a delight to be with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bob. Bless you, and bless our community and for the support I know that's coming. Bless you. See you at the next drop-off.
Yes, and if you want to save the chat, if you'd like to save in the chat room, there is the Farm Workers, the website that you can donate to. If you want to save the chat, go over to the right-hand side of those 3 little dots, and just press those 3 little dots. And you can save all the information that we've gathered here, including all the things about the farm workers. The video is also there, and so you may want to review it again. So please, thank you for coming. It's
What video?
The video that we saw, the farm workers going across the border with Ann, or whoever was narrating, that was, Jason said that he put that also on.
In the chat
room.
Oh,
so
cool.
If you want to save all that, just go to the very end of the messages at the very end, and there's 3 little dots to the very right.
Yeah.
So choose that, and you will be able to save the chat, and therefore save the information, save the website, and please donate generously if you have the chance to do that. And also, if you feel motivated to do the drop-off and the distribution, please, let's get organized and let's continue to work on both the legislation and also with the size 5 diapers, whatever this is.
Yay, yay.
Bring it together. So, thank you very much, community, for your extraordinary work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
And Jason, yes, thank you, Jason.
Jason.
Yeah, Jason.
Thank you.
Whoa.
Yeah, I could not do this work without Jason. God bless Jason. Thank you.
Yes, Jason. Yeah.
2 little angels. Yay.
Yay.
Thank you.
Both angels.